Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us today on today's webinar. We're going to get started in about 1 minute here. Just getting the stream lined up, just getting everything sorted. If you are just getting into the room, make sure that you have coffee or a beverage or something, whatever you need to make sure that you're, fully engaged. You have everything that you need, and we'll get started very shortly. I'm super excited to share with you today. We did this webinar yesterday, actually. We had 50 people participate. There was a lot of interest in terms of registration, in terms of conversations, in terms of folks that wanted to be here but couldn't. And so just wanted to provide the opportunity for folks to attend and to watch it again. Or if you, had a team member that you wanted to invite because you liked the webinar, or even if you wanted to attend again, just to get something different, that you had the opportunity to do so, and also ask questions at the end. So in terms of content for today, we've got about 40 minutes-ish of content, and then the last kind of 10 minutes or so for Q&A, just to ask relevant questions for your specific situation, or of course, anything in general. So thanks so much for being here. High functioning teams, the key to leadership success. My name is Anthony Taylor. I'm excited to share this with you. It's really been a culmination of a lot of the work that we do at SME Strategy on a day-to-day basis, but then, kind of like my life's work of personal research. And it's just such a topic that comes up all the time with folks. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to share it with you. I hope you enjoy it. Let's just get into it. So a little bit about me, I run a company called SME Strategy. We focus on strategic planning, support teams in creating their strategic plans, and support them in implementing them. And one of the things that, tell you about all my background and all that kind of stuff, but when you buy something at the grocery store and then you kind of look at the ingredients, you say, hey, what is this made out of? How did this come to be? One of the things that I wanted to share with us as we get through this webinar is, my inspiration, because nothing I share here is true, as in there is no one correct way. There is no definite way in terms of how to lead teams, how to drive behaviors, how to support, teams being successful. And I have been inspired by, Harvard Business Review. I've been reading for, 10, 15 years. Like folks like Malcolm Gladwell, who had a webinar just the day before I did. I read a lot of behavioral books on there. Of course, I have a business degree, so I learned all that. My colleague, Jenna Sedmak, who's been working with me for 10 years, is an associate professor at a university here, so she brings academia into it. And I have entrepreneurship stuff. So just putting all of that together kind of inspires the approach, inspires the thinking. And of course, there's the new moderner management books, Good to Great, disciplines of execution, Cotter, change management, all of that kind of stuff. Cotter's kind of old, but I say all that so you understand, everything that I'm about to share here is a blend of academia, business strategy, leadership, and really all of it is just something for you to consider as you work with your teams, as you drive your teams forward, new and old, to support you in potentially a different way of thinking about this. So yes, there's going to be tactical things. I did share that, definitely get some tactical pieces to it, but it's really around shifting your context, your team's context around how you approach team development, so that you can be high functioning. That means you're working well together. That will then lead into high performance. So some folks focus on the performance, the output. I think that there's a gap before then to be accomplished. And then there's the stuff that and then there's the stuff that you don't know. So I really want to be able to share that so that you have a couple ahas at the end of today. So without further ado, let's get into it. Really how we look at this is, what is the problem? The problem that we see is that teams are working together suboptimally. Okay. So for whatever reason, a lot of teams say, hey, we're too busy. I have too much stuff going on. I have barely enough time to do my regular workday, let alone extra stuff as a team. Some folks just don't know how. They don't know how to collaborate effectively. They don't know how to work together. They don't know how to put all of that together. Humans are complex and sometimes annoying. I'm sure you have folks, that you work with, or maybe there's somebody sitting next to you that's kind of annoying when you work with them, whether that's personalities, whether that's approaches, whether that's tendencies, whether that's intricacies. We are human beings. Human beings have their challenges, good, bad, or otherwise. And so being able to manage that adds complexity to the ability to work together as a team. And finally, there are groups that are doing it, they're putting the time in, it's just not effective. Like you might be having team meetings, you might be working on these type of optimization things, and it just still doesn't get you across the line for where you want to go. And I want to highlight that, there's potentially missing something that hopefully we can highlight here that will support you in getting that breakthrough for why your team isn't clicking like it should. Now, again, teams are complex. We'll go into it quite a bit, but just for you to consider is like, hey, maybe there's something you don't even know you're missing in here. So, why talk about this? Why attend this webinar? Why spend the time? Why do any of this stuff? Because, it takes time, money, and energy. And how I want you to think about it is really the cost on your organization, on your team, on your company of under effective teams. Okay, so what do you think the costs are specifically for your organization? Now, of course, it varies depending on how many employees you have. If you have 10, 20, 100, 200, 500, 1,000. But if you think, on an average employee, right? The only reason employees exist, unfortunately, in this capitalist society is because they are going to produce a greater output. So whether they're a 60,000 year employee, 100,000, a lot of the senior executives we work with are, multiple six figures, they're going to produce an output, right? And the output have some version of a multiplier. Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 10, who knows? Now, that multiplier that they could potentially get assumes optimal performance, right? And so what if the team is not performing optimally? Or what if the individual is not performing optimally? Then you start getting, a 10, a 5, a 10, a 15, a 20% decrease on their, upside potential. So, why is this important for you? You kind of do a calculation. It's like, hey, what is the upside potential of my employees? And how complete are they in being able to accomplish what they want to accomplish? Because if you're losing 10% performance on an employee or individual who brings $500,000 of benefit to the organization, well, that's $50,000 of lost potential. And that's, I think, being generous. When you think of like, hey, if they can't make the right decisions, if they're hampered by things, if meetings take twice as long, if they're having to argue, if they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And so think about that as one employee could be 10, 20, 30, 50, $100,000, and then multiply that by all of the employees in your organization. When we do strategic planning, when we do any work, we really approach it with an ROI approach because, we're not cheap, so it costs money to do this. And so like for you, I want you to really think about, if you have a number, like what is the number of suboptimal performance costing your organization? If your team isn't working as effectively as it can, what is the true cost to you and your organization specifically? The other tricky part about this is that it is off the top, as in your gross, but it occurs as your net, in the sense that this lack of efficiency takes away from your profitability, not your upside. So it's even more expensive mistakes because it's being felt at the bottom of the line versus at the top line. So, just to make it really important that you say, hey, this is what's at stake of this webinar, this content, this way of thinking, a new approach could be worth, 6, 7, 8 figures to you, which is my goal. Okay, so why? Why does this happen? Why are teams not effectively working together? Why is there, low performance, low effectiveness with teams? And my belief is it's because there is just not enough focused time. For whatever reason, not enough focused time to actually be working together, to spend time as an executive team, as a leadership team, as a project team, to be able to discuss and solve root cause issues, because you're busy. You're pulled in a lot of different directions, and it ultimately doesn't make it to the top of the priority list because there are more obvious things to do that aren't working in a team. And so, when you think of your organization, say, are we spending enough time to be working on the stuff that we need to work on as it relates to a high functioning team? So it's not just spending time in the business, it's spending time as a team working together. And I'll kind of expand this a little bit. So one of the reasons that teams don't perform well is because they have a difference in understanding by person or by individual as to what an agreement is the agreement within the organization. So we'll talk a lot about process, and process is just kind of a big word for anything that's defined. But as an example, which of these two kind of statements do you feel more comfortable with? I'm 99% sure this is the way to do it versus I'm 100% sure. Did you do this thing? Was it accomplished? I'm 99% sure, or I'm 100% sure. Now, it doesn't seem like much. It's 1%. But the difference in that 1% leaves so much room, opportunity for mistakes. And it's, that's assuming you're doing really, really great at that 1%. Now, if you think of certain processes, certain systems, certain ways of doing things in your organization, their likelihood is that you could be 80% aligned or 60% aligned or 50% aligned. And so that lack of understanding, that lack of clarity, that lack of agreement, that lack of completeness around what is the way that we're doing things is where teams fall apart. And the challenge is they don't spend enough time trying to focus on that alignment to make sure that everybody is always on the same page. That's why you get frustration. That's why you get uncertainty. That's why in some cases you get apathy. That's why things start moving around in circles. It's because a small gap just introduces the glimpse of doubt. And that will erode confidence and clarity in your team. By the way, you're going to have opportunity for questions later. You can drop them into the kind of questions panel here if you have them, but we'll definitely do questions after. All right. So what is the big idea here? Here's what I want you to think about is getting your team together to work on their shared ways of working, as in how do we work together as a team, and supporting sufficient communication to get as close to 100% aligned at all times. And you might not always be able to get to 100%, but the less room for doubt or uncertainty you have, the faster you're going to be able to make decisions, the faster you're going to get people on board, the less change resistance you're going to have, and the easier you're going to be able to move your organization forward towards your strategic goals, because that's, what I assert all of you are here to do. And I know that because I asked you all questions about what you want to get out of today. So more root causes, it's one thing to say, hey, okay, there's just not enough time. That's why people aren't working together. And that'd be, easy to say, but kind of a cop-out. But, let's think about it. What does not enough time working as a team collectively do? Well, it creates a lack of trust. That 1% creates unknowns, and then we don't know if we can trust each other. There's lack of a shared truth. It's like, what do we agree? What are we seeing? Do we have the shared understanding around what this is? If you've ever seen that kind of gif of like one person's looking at a 6 and one person's looking at a 9, they're looking at the same thing, but from a different perspective. Happens all the times in organizations. If you think of the various positions and perspectives that people have, perspectives are good. The challenge is when you don't have a shared perspective on a shared issue. And finally, lack of agreement. Like there's no documentation, there's no signed on paper as to here's how we're going to do things. People abhor processes and structure. It's been said, first it will piss you off, then it will set you free. Well, if you don't have an agreement, if you don't have a sit down, there's no deal. And so teams go through often taking on, million, 10 million, $100 million projects, initiatives, et cetera. And they don't take the time to make sure on paper that everybody agrees to the same agreements. And often is because they're too busy to do so. And there's a cost. So from my perspective, a shared approach, one that is aligned and unified, is infinitely better than personal preference plus the learned way of doing things. So if you've ever worked in a team, or even if you haven't worked in a team, you probably have your ways of doing things. Here's how I do project charters. Here's how I like to scope initiatives. Here, I prefer to do goals versus objectives. Here's what I like to do. I do it this way because it works for me. How often do you hear that? I don't want to use this new software because I'm using the old software. And then compound that with the fact that all of us learned our stuff differently. Not everybody went to business school. Not everybody is an engineer. Not everybody is a technologist. You learn based on your bosses. You will learn based on past jobs. You've learned if you've been in the company for a long time. You have your learned way of doing things, and then you have the way that you like doing things, and you have years or decades of experience that compounded into a team. And then, you put it all together and you're expecting everybody to work the same way. Kind of like, when you're in a relationship with another person and you hand that person your box of like stuff and preferences and all that, and then you hand them your box of preferences and stuff like that, and then that tickety boo, you never have any disagreements about anything, right? It's just smooth sailing from there because you just shared it. It's like, no, it happens all the time. It's a dynamic state of being able to work together, and then compound that with the fact that it's your job and there's like money at stake. So there's just so many complexities that are related to teams. So it's not as simple as, hey, let's just do X, Y, Z. There's a lot of unknowns. So what are those unknowns? What do they look like in practice? For any team, and you can think about processes that you have or structures or systems that you have. It's like, what is the right way of doing things? When we do strategic planning, we fundamentally think of like, hey, the vision, where are we going? This is what it looks like. But you can think of any processes that you have set up. If you're in accounting, how you set up a vendor in your payroll. If you do marketing, how you do a campaign. If you're in finance, like how quickly you spin out your monthly reports. It's like, what is the right way? What is our way as a team? If you're in a larger organization, you have executive teams, you have middle managers, then you have sub leaders, and then you have people on the floor, and there could be different ways of doing things, and potentially with a very good reason. But the more different ways of doing things is the more complex that it gets. Has this way changed? The world has changed. There's always changes. You might make updates to processes. You might be putting in an ERP or something like that, and then it changes the process. So if you're not catching everybody up on the way of the new way of doing things, they're going to do it the old way. And then again, those processes can still trickle down and be different. So there's, how does our team do it, and how do the other teams do it? So for example, how do we sell? How do we prioritize? How do we want our meetings to go? How do we want our projects to go? How are we going to approach blank? Whatever it is. We have a client the other day saying, hey, how are we going to approach our retail business? How do we do this side of supply chain? Different client. So what I want you to do is, on your paper, I just want you to write down a couple processes or processes that you have that might not have full clarity to them. Okay, I'm going to give you 20 seconds. I'm going to have a sip of my coffee, but I want you to write down 2 or 3 or 4 processes that within your teams that you see, hey, not necessarily is it aligned or they're not, but what are processes that you might need alignment around? And the reason I want you to write it down is so that you have a starting point in terms of, oh, we need to put a bit of structure. We need to work on this collaboratively. How do we do it? Your CEO might have a different way than your VP does. Well, whose do you pick? I already know the answer. We're not going to answer that one now. All right. So looking at this, you should have a couple processes, couple structures, couple things that you can agree on within your teams to make sure that you get clear, and then you can use this as a next step. Okay, so I kind of jokingly said, hey, whose process are we going to use if you have a CEO's process versus somebody else's process? And that just highlights the layers of complexity within, organizations. So you have different personalities. I was talking to a gentleman the other day, and he said, I'm an executor and this person is a dreamer. And when I get into meetings, we could have a fully fleshed out plan. And then before we jump into the execution, they say, hey, I have a better way, and they derail it. All right. I highlighted the difference in, personalities of, like, let's say, call it project managers, or even by role in marketing or engineers. Like, different people do different things differently. And so you have to deal with the human side of it. A lot of what we do within our strategy work is around organizational behavior, not just the document. You also have emotions as part of this. You could have not slept the day before because you have 2 kids and they had a nosebleed or whatever. Your football team could have lost the day before, and that brought into it. It could be winter, and it could be, a challenging time and everybody's kind of depressed. It could be, just stressful because there's a lot of pressure because it's quarter end, or you have a big gala coming up and you need to do that, or it's regulatory season, or I can't remember what it was called, legislative season, and then you have to deal with legislators all day. But all of those things have impacts on people, let alone the individual personalities. Then you have realities. Realities is like the reality of that person, how their life is on a day-to-day basis. You and I both know that there are folks that have, reality is all rosy. Reality is, oh, everything's going badly. You can say, hey, we're under a lot of stress here, or we're going to make it through. The reality of that person is their truth. So if you have a CEO who's getting under a lot of pressure from their boss, yes, it is emotional, but it also is like their context of the situation as they view the world, or like a filter that they see the world through. And on an executive team, you could have 10 different realities in addition to the personalities and emotions. You could also have different locations. We work with multinational businesses. And so you could have a team in Germany, you could have a team in the US, you could have a team in Canada, you could have a team in Japan, you have a team in China, and all of them have a different reality as to what is, or not different reality, but different locations that alter their perspective. They might have a tight-knit team. You might have teams that are fully remote. I know a couple people on this webinar said, hey, how can I, do leadership with a remote team? Well, it's recognizing that, they're not in an office. They don't have people around them. They are individuals, and you need to be able to, build that camaraderie, but it's like their experience of the world. Heck, we have another client that's got 3 locations across Florida. One is, in West Palm, and one is the other side, West Florida, East Florida. Anyway, but even by different location, you can have different cultures in terms of how you think and how you do things. Now you have then another layer of individual beliefs. It could be as simple as, hey, I believe that we should have work-life balance. I believe that people should work, 10 hours a day and work on weekends, and there's no such thing as that. I believe that somebody should get back to me in 6 hours when they call. I believe that 72 hours is totally acceptable. I think that every meeting, we should have a bit of time to get to know each other. I believe that, we should get right down to business. I believe that we should have a dress code. I don't believe that we should. So beliefs about things, let alone, other religious beliefs, personal beliefs, or, backgrounds, etc. All of those things add into the challenges and dynamicism about working with a team. So you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, generally speaking, that it's like understanding these components and elements of individuals within teams, and not to accommodate them, yes, but to support them in being able to be successful in an organization. But the first step is being able to acknowledge that that exists. And then the last one is kind of like situations, right? So if you have somebody who is, again, head of finance, head of supply chain, head of marketing, all of them have a different situation, different role, different hat that they're wearing. In some groups, I've worked with boards that have leadership teams and managers within them, and all of them are wearing different hats, have different lenses on their situation. And so building team effectiveness and high functioning teams has so many components to it that it's not easy to do unless you're recognizing all of these layers of complexity, and then you're taking it into account as you're working with your teams and working with your individuals. So how do you solve all of that? How do you do your best to overcome individual issues, team issues, preferences, etc.? Bring clarity and explicits, and I wrote explicitity, which I don't know if is a word, to all shared activities. Bring clarity and explicitity to all shared activities. So earlier I had you ask yourself, what are a couple processes that we work on as a team that might be important, or what are ones that might be unclear? How can you bring that from 99.9 to 100% clarity and explicitness, so that everybody on the team, everybody working in that initiative knows exactly what is what, recognizing that it is a moving target, okay? So the key that I want you to think about here, or the key takeaway at this point, is that you have to work in conjunction with each other, okay? So when we work in strategic plans, it's a team strategy, right? It's an organizational strategy versus an individual strategy. You can't accomplish strategic priorities, strategic goals without collaboration. You cannot accomplish strategic priorities without collaboration, because they're organizational priorities. So they need to be solved, addressed, tackled as an organization. Operationally, however, you can survive in silos. because everybody can kind of put their head down, get their working done, and it'll be fine. But strategically, you can't. And so as you think of where you're sitting here, whether it's like an organizational development consultant, whether you're a Vistage chair, whether you are a CEO, whether you're, VP of marketing, whether you work in the police department, looking and saying, hey, how do I approach my individual team members' success? And then what can I do at the individual level, but what needs to be done at the group level of group, level of individual. Okay, so another concept I'd like you to think about. So I'm imagining everybody on this call is familiar with a magnet. Okay, the way magnets work, they do one of two things. They attract or they repel. Same with decisions. A decision will either have pulled people into it or push them away. There is no middle ground. And so as you make decisions in an organization, or as you make decisions in a team in terms of how we're going to do things, it's not always about agreeing with the decision. You don't have to say, this is the right decision, but you do have to say, this is the decision that we've made and we're going to follow it. Amazon has a thing that says disagree and commit. You don't have to agree to it, but you need to commit. And if you're not moving with the decision, you're moving against the decision. And so if you talk about like lack of buy-in or change resistance, is because those people are moving against the decision. If you think about like the good to great, get the right folks on the bus, it's if you're on the bus, you're moving with the decision. If you're off the bus, you're not with the decision. But there's no middle ground. And so if you don't have a clear decision, then nobody can be bought in or out. In addition, if you don't have a clear direction or destination, then there's no way you can equip anybody to make the right decision, because you don't know what decision to make because it predicates the need for a direction. So if your team doesn't have clarity in terms of what it's trying to accomplish, where you're going, what the priorities are, then it's going to be impossible to even begin the work of making decisions and putting processes and structures in place. And so we do strategic planning. We talk about that all the time. And it really is the first step. Strategic planning is a starting place. Assuming you have strategic alignment for the direction, then you're okay. But only then can you actually work on the path to move forward. If there's no direction, you can't even begin to work on the path because you're going to spin around in circles. And so if you're sitting on this call and you're experiencing frustration, apathy, you feel like you're spinning around in circles, probably because there's no direction, probably. All right, side note for me, as it relates to strategic planning, working with teams, is that I've been doing this 13 years. I've worked with hundreds of teams, different cultures all over the place, different levels of sophistication. And the number of individuals who resist goal setting or setting targets is baffling to me. It's baffling. They will not set a target and they just won't do it. And I was like, well, why does that happen? And the thing that comes back is we don't want to set a target in case that we're wrong. It happens a lot in nonprofits. It also happens in for-profits. We don't want to put it out there because what if we don't get it? Somebody asked me about stretch goals. I can talk about stretch goals later if you guys want. But fundamentally, the reason that people don't want to do that is out of fear. And if there's fear, it's because there's not enough trust. Now, whether that's trust in the system, whether that's trust in the individual, whatever, but it's basically a modern day survival mechanism for not looking stupid. Now, I understand that if you're a nonprofit, you don't want to set a target because you don't want it to, it might impact your funding. I get that. But internally, you need to be able to make sure that you have a mechanism to support success. If you don't know what you're aiming at, you're never going to hit it. But this is the number one thing that I have found challenges teams is setting specific targets. And it highlights basically a lack of permission to be wrong, whether that's culturally, or whether that's very real punitive damages. But fundamentally, it's a lack of trust with somebody that doesn't allow them to set a target and fail. And it leads to, ineffective progress. Okay, I did say you're going to get some practical things. I've got a bunch of practical things, but here's 5 changes that I encourage you to make that you can make within your organization to be able to drive all of this forward. Okay, so number 1, allocate 5% of your working time to collaborative work. So if you're working 40 hours a week, that's 2 hours a week to working as a team together. So you might say, hey, I have, I'm doing meetings and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, you might have a weekly meeting, you might have a monthly meeting. I'm really saying meetings and collaborative work to work through these challenges, these unknowns, these existential questions that you need to address in order to move forward. Number 2, build recurring meetings to discuss overall progress as a team. One of the things that we do when we do strategy sessions is we start off by like celebrating, because often you're like in the day-to-day of working, but you forget about all the progress that you're making, or you're not making any progress because you haven't committed to it. And by setting up recurring meetings to discuss the process or the progress, it sets up an accountability loop to make sure that people does it, and that will make it stick. So even if you just did these 2 things for the next 6 months, I'm confident that you'd see significant progress because you'd be working on the team versus in the business. Number 3, discuss shared expectations of one another. How do we want to work together? I mentioned that like relationship, you hand them a box, they give you a box, and then everything is hunky-dory. Well, obviously, no, nobody does that. And no, that's not realistic. But when teams get together, are your teams talking about, hey, here are my preferences. I prefer, afternoon meetings because mornings are my best time to do things. I prefer that when we talk, we like raise our hand. I think that I really like having, clear measures, clear accountabilities, and finishing up the meeting like that. I'm an email versus phone person. I'm a text versus meeting person. Everybody has different preferences in terms of how they do things. And just by taking the time to have the 1 or 2 conversations about how to work together, you are going to work more effectively. A practical tip for this, there are project charters when you work on project teams, and then there's team charters that we do as part of our implementation programs to support teams in having these conversations. Anytime you have a new person on the team, it's a new team. So don't take for granted that you have a team of 9, you add another one, it's a whole new team, even though the composition is mostly the same. Number 4, fix stuff that doesn't work. Like get stuff off the list. I'm confident. I already know who's on this call. I know who's on YouTube. I know who you are and I know what you're dealing with. And I'm confident that you have a list of stuff that are like kind of nagging complaints. They have just like never been solved. Get to work. Like make time to solve that stuff, because that is what's going to start making the kind of proverbial dominoes fall and start making the changes happen within your organization. As you get stuff off the list, your team is going to feel lighter. They're going to feel more confident. They're going to feel happier that they're making the stuff move. And then you're going to be able to work on other stuff. Fundamentally, you need to make this a non-negotiable priority. This is like it must happen versus nice to have. You need to prioritize this over other things. Yes, it means saying no. Ultimately, I want you to think about this is going to give you capacity. Imagine if you didn't have to have meetings 2 or 3 or 4 times over. Imagine it was like the Groundhog Day of teamwork. If you didn't have that, you'd have more time to do stuff. So yes, it's an investment of time. Yes, it's an investment of energy. Yes, you're going to have to do something about it. But if you make it a priority, you're going to create a better working environment. You're going to create a more effective team. You're going to create a more successful team. You're going to make progress, and it's going to keep going because you're going to want to do it. You're going to be psyched about the work that you can do and that you have done. And how I've seen this play out as we've worked with teams over years and years and years through our implementation programs is like typically the first layer of the onion is like a process issue. It's just a system that people aren't following, or there isn't a system in place and people are kind of doing it ad hoc. And it's kind of like not a defense mechanism, but the next layer is people issues. You can't effectively address people issues while you're managing process issues, because they will kind of protect those people, not in a bad way, but you can't get to them. So, I found first start with the process stuff. Once you clear process stuff up, and you get a more clarity in terms of who's doing what and how it's working, what that is, then you can deal with people issues, which includes supporting people and helping them be successful. Once you support the people issues, whether that's like talent turnover, whether that's, just dynamics that we've talked about, then you start finding growth opportunities. Hey, now that we're not, putting fires out internally, now we can look externally to things that we want to do. And, it's just, again, utilization of energy and prioritization. Once you start tackling some of those growth opportunities and people are excited about work again, then you have higher trust. So it really becomes a flywheel internally of being able to work well together, be able to do these things, and then have team being great. And then once you have the higher trust, then it leads to higher performance. Like folks are excited about working. You're getting stuff done better, faster every time. But really, it all starts with the process stuff. People don't like process because it's boring. But really, it's the stuff that's going to build a sustainable platform for your success as an organization, as a team, as an individual. So more practically, conversations that you can have with your team tomorrow. Today's Friday, Monday. Unless you're in the Middle East and you work on a Saturday. So information transfer. How are we doing? Where are we stuck? Like, take the pause and just say, hey, what are the challenges that we have here? When you focus on process, you can depersonalize something. So you're not saying, hey, quality's bad, you're the worst, Jim, or our sales are really behind. Like, Janet, what are you doing? It's okay, we need to be at this level. This is where we're at now. Team, how do we bridge that gap? And being able to discuss what we're doing, what's working, as well as what's not working and where we're stuck. Discussing as a team how to make decisions and who owns the decision within that. Again, if you don't have a direction, you can't make a decision. If there's no trust, you can't make a decision. And so your team needs confidence as they work together. Harvard did a study a long time ago around companies that had a strong strategy execution, and they interviewed 26,000 people. And the kind of top two themes that came out of that was information flows and decision rights. So if information flowed freely and people knew how to make decisions within their organization, it correlated strongly to strong strategy execution. So first one, information transfer. Second one, decision rights. Third is clarity of role and authority. One of the exercises, workshops that we do in our implementation program is a RACI matrix. Stands for responsibilities, accountable, consulted, informed. And there's another one, S, supported. And so when people understand, like, hey, I'm the one who owns that, or, Fabio is the person who's making the decision on this, but he also needs to talk to Karen about making the decision. Everybody can streamline the conversations they need to have to get something done. Oh, this person needs to be informed about this. Oh, we really have to make sure that this stakeholder gets bought in with what we're doing. I've seen initiatives fail because they haven't engaged the right stakeholders. And we talked about change management a little bit. So there's a story of an organization doing a strategic plan. They engaged with some of their stakeholders. They didn't. They rolled out the plan that was, in principle, good for everybody. And the one stakeholder said, no, we're not in. No one ever talked to us. And so by really making sure that you understand people's roles within the groups and the dynamics within the groups, you're going to be able to make better decisions, because even if it's good for somebody, nobody wants to be kind of pushed a decision on. And so understanding people's roles within a project and respecting those will help you move your plans forward. Fourth, how do we run our meetings? You probably spend a lot of time in meetings. You might not have a clear structure, system, process for agendas, notes, accountabilities, follow-up, putting your vision or mission at the top. So just have a conversation around, hey, how can we improve our meetings? What's one thing we can do to improve our next meeting, and do that over and over and over again? As I said, focus on it for 6 months. You're going to be amazed at the results that you get. And then finally, what do we prioritize? Different groups have different prioritization based on, their own projects, et cetera, whether that's important or urgent or impact and ease. There's a 2x2 matrix that you can do. But as a group, prioritize your biggest projects. If I think ABC project is important and you think XYZ project is important, we are always going to be fighting. We're going to be pulling each other versus, hey, let's move in the right direction and do all that together. So discuss as a group, as an organization, as a team, how do we prioritize? What are we prioritizing so that we can make sure that we're on the same page? High functioning is not a fixed state. So just because your team is performing well doesn't mean they will always perform well. It's a continuous evolution and continued work that needs to be done. You're not always at 100%. You can easily get back to 99.9, et cetera. However, or in addition, neither is low performance. You don't need to be stuck as a low performing team. You just need to put the work and the time and the energy in place to be able to move it forward. So I invite you to look at the opportunities that you have to improve your team's ability to perform at a high level. So in summary, What are some things that you can do practically Monday morning or whatever day you watch this with your team? And you can even watch this webinar with your team. Say, okay, what can we do? Discuss areas of improvement as opportunities. And I said, as objectively as possible. Focus on the process versus the person. Make it a shared outcome goal that we're trying to accomplish versus an individual one. Build a cadence, 5% of your time, 2 hours a week. If you do that, I guarantee you will get ROI on your time as a group. It will increase trust, it will increase effectiveness, it will increase performance, it will increase impact. Lastly, own it. Own the good and the bad. We talked a lot about trust, right? And the gap of trust and what that gap and that sliver of trust does. Trust is having confidence that an issue will be resolved in a reasonable manner. Ownership makes that possible. So if you've ever been in an experience and you say, hey, there's a problem, and everybody kind of looks around the room to say like, hey, who's going to take it on? There's no trust that it's actually going to be resolved. Whereas you say, hey, I have a problem with this thing. And you say, okay, I, as the CEO, promise to address it by March, or I'm going to have a resolution in the next 2 weeks, or at least I will get you an information, or I will follow up with you by the end of the month to make sure you have that. The issue isn't solved, but by having full ownership of what's going to happen, that builds the trust and that makes sure that there's an accountability system for it moving forward. And similarly, if stuff isn't going well, you say, own it. No, it's my bad. That was my area. I dropped the ball there. Here's what I'm going to do better next time. It's not about being perfect. You're never going to be perfect. People just need to know that they can count on you. We even talked about like roles and positioning and making sure that like you look over your shoulder and you know that their person is in their spot. That's what a team is. Knowing that everybody's doing their part of the job and that as we go through and we execute, that we have trust that it's going to get handled because we did all the planning and we put all the pieces in place. So have conversations about your team. Like look at your team and say, do we know where we want to go? Are we clear about what success looks like? From a strategic planning lens, we often use a 3-year vision. You might want to do a 1-year vision depending on what works. But do we all know where we want to go? And are we all going to the same place? Are we really working as well as we can be? And take an opportunity to look objectively at yourself to say, hey, am I doing it? Am I doing it right? Are we doing it? And if not, like, let's talk about it. It's not going to get fixed if we don't talk about it. And the real biter is if we continue to do what we're doing, will we get where we want to be? If we think of like your trajectory, I talked to an organization the other day, saying we want to go from 500 million to $1 billion. So that's great. Is that the path currently? Like, are you going to need a breakthrough somewhere to be able to get you there? Everything I've talked about today is just about creating breakthroughs in your organization to create opportunities for success. You're never going to be perfect all the time, but it's the continued work, the continued conversations as a team to say, hey, are we on the trajectory to hit our plan? Are we on the trajectory to get to where we want to go? And if we don't do the extra work, are we really going to get there? So we talk, 45 minutes about high functioning teams. It's like, that's the key to get you to where you want to go. And that's the only thing that we care about as an organization, because it'll help you get to where you want. So have a conversation with your team. If you're interested, you can definitely have a conversation with us and you can share us what you got. The reason I do this webinar, the reason why I want to do the webinar again, also to be able to get the folks on YouTube, we just really want to help your team have impact, have success, have the pieces in place to get there. Sometimes it's challenging. It's challenging to look at yourself and say, hey, we're not doing this as well as we can. And for whether you're a for-profit organization, nonprofit organization, there's impact out of this work. There's employees that have, lives and families that, they want to have a good job. They want to feel like they're being successful. And if you don't have a highly effective team, if you're sitting at that like 50, 60, 70% alignment, they're nowhere meeting their potential. And for nonprofit organizations there's people that you're impacting. And so if you're not working as a team, you're selling those folks short in addition to your own self short. And so I just really hope that you take a couple things from today, you put it in place, it shapes how you think of strategic planning, strategy execution, and really like team behaviors, and just like work on it for the next 6 months. And I'm confident you'll be amazed at the outcomes. So I just appreciate everybody being here today. I'll open it up for a couple questions. Happy to go into it. One of the questions that we had was, how do you gauge alignment? Okay, how do you gauge alignment? Do you use surveys? Do you interviews? And so when we do strategic planning, we do surveys and interviews. But alignment is a moving state. So talking about, are we explicit in terms of where we're going? Often organizations say, hey, we want to grow. Well, what does grow mean? Does that mean 1 million? Does that mean 5 million? Does that mean 10 million? Does that mean 100 million? And often there's just like a gap in between where either the CEO wants to go or the executives want to go. And so the smaller that gap is, the more confidence everybody has that they're going to do the right things. By the way, if you're on Zoom, you can just open it up in the Q&A box. And if you're on YouTube, I will just look at the comments now. And if you're watching this as a recording, well, I can't answer your questions because this is in the past. Okay, using the analogy, how do you recommend focusing on process issues first, assuming they require teamwork and collaboration to get everyone moving in the same direction? I would probably get everybody to discuss, just like we did here, say, what are the list of issues that you have? So what are the processes that aren't working? And then as a group saying, okay, let's tackle one. Doesn't even need to be the most important one. Let's just tackle one and say, hey, where do we want this to be? Where is the uncertainty? There is a problem-solving framework. It's an engineering problem-solving framework. It's got 8 steps. Don't ask me what the steps are. We just kind of do it intuitively. And if you look at them, you'll say, okay, what is the problem? What is the cause of the problem? What are the symptoms of the problem? What are some alternatives to solutions? What is the solution that we're picking? And just like get it down on paper to make sure that everybody is agreeing on like, hey, this is what we're doing, and then review it. And just the process of discussing a process will help your team feel more aligned, more committed, and they'll just be excited about having the conversation. But the first one's the hardest. So hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions that folks have today? I know that there is a chat function on here. If you do, I can open up the chat if you have any kind of feedback. If you like today's webinar, there's always opportunities to, like I said, engage with us more around this. I did send out the slides via email. So if you'd like to read those. Another change that we got is how do you overcome change resistance? And so I have my notes from emails. So change resistance. Change resistance is fundamentally that people aren't sure what the thing is or why it's happening. And so in an ideal world, before you do any changes, you solicit feedback, you do stakeholder engagement, you understand where people's concerns are, you make the decision, and then you roll it back out. Why there's change resistance is because people interpret the change as bad. And so if they interpret the change as bad, they are going to resist the change. So how do you position whatever change that you're making so it occurs as good? And not all changes are good. Some changes are bad, but you probably at scale wouldn't make bad changes. And so it's really about helping the reality of that person recognize that that is a good change for the organization. It might not be an immediately good change for them. And then your job as a leader is to be able to communicate how that change becomes beneficial for them as an organization or as an individual. Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody. Thank you so much for being on the webinar today. I really hope you got some value out of the content, out of the ways of thinking, out of things that you can bring into your team. I would love to hear in the chat or as a Q&A if you got value from it. You can reach out to us, smestrategy.net. We're going to be doing more webinars like this in the new year. One of the things I didn't mention is, in addition to all of my learning, I got to interview, hundreds of people through the Strategy and Leadership podcast. We're going to be making that a live event. So if you enjoyed attending these, be sure to check that out. And it's been really just great sharing with y'all, getting the opportunity. And I just hope that you move forward and help your teams be as effective as they can be. So thank you, everybody. Great to see you. Appreciate you being here. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Anthony C. Taylor. If you like, I've got one more question here. So as an organizational development consultant, where do you start for reading the context of the organization before interviewing? So this is, I assume, as an external person, this is you talk to your client. Your client is hiring you for a reason. You get really clear about what the reason is, and then if they are unsure or they're lying to you about the reason you're coming in, then you just like go back and figure out what it is. But I think ultimately, as an OD consultant, you really want to figure out the source of the misalignment within the organization. But in my experience doing this for a long time, it's pretty consistent that either lack of direction, lack of buy-in, lack of leadership, lack of systems, lack of trust, lack of processes, and really just the way to accomplish that is by tackling some of those conversations like we covered today. So appreciate you all. I got two more here. Oh no, those are just thank yous. All right, everybody. Appreciate you. Thanks for connecting. Thanks for being here. Hope you enjoyed the webinar.